She's
debate.
I couldn't read the signs.
No problem.
I'm sorry.
No
I read them wrong.
No problem.
Thank you.
Here, Minister, as always, you're more than welcome to the House, and it's delighted to have you here. And in fact, the statement that you put before us today and your speech is actually quite seminal. And I actually think the statement should be circulated, because I think you were very fair in giving your time to try and give us a summary of what you put before us today. But actually the foundations here are such a strong foundation for a new home for children. For me, I just want to commend you, and I can't commend you enough for what is here. And I just think more people should get to read it, because it's that whole picture. All too often we only focus in one part of a child's life, and it's looking at that journey that a child goes through, and that for me is so important. So thank you for providing that vision and starting this discussion that we're having with a very strong foundation. Obviously, Minister, prevention and early intervention is something that everybody supports, but for me it's music to all our ears to hear a minister actually promoting it and putting it first and foremost. All too often it's more in seminars and symposiums that people talk about these theories, and then we get into the House and we talk about firefighting and dealing with crisis, and not actually giving prevention and early intervention the thought and deliberation that they need. And I do very much welcome the area-based approach to Child Property Initiative and looking at what you're going to do there. And I suppose the difficulty I have is just trying to look at, of the selection criteria for the 3 new sites and the additional 4 that will come on. How do we ensure that that selection process is transparent, that the programmes are rooted in evidence and best practice, as you said, because there can be programmes that can look good, but if they're not providing the outcomes for children and the delivery that we all wish, how do we ensure that they can? So I suppose for me, I'm just trying to look at more details, because all too often when we talk about early intervention, we all fall a little bit, we talk just about early years, and that's why I really do welcome your speech, because you looked at that journey a child goes on, the key transition points, those flash points in a child's life that all too often get missed. We see it in disability services. It tends to be at a much younger age if we don't get in there early with children, their life chances. But mental health tends to be early adolescence, that we see the mental health issues become more apparent during an early adolescence phase. And in fact, you mentioned Heckman, and Kuna and Heckman in 2010 did a working paper on investment in our young people. And in there they've shown, the research has shown that the effects of early intervention in disadvantaged children's lives is lessened if it's not followed up by later investments at later stages. So we all talk about the investments and the importance and the reap that we get from investing in early years. But if we don't give that continuum of supports, that investment is actually lost, and we don't continue to have that investment. Minister, I do very much welcome your focus in looking at how we can look at services and providing services and maybe moving away. And you mentioned the advisory report, and we had a good brief debate in the House, and we are going to continue the debate in the House with Minister Burton. But it was very welcome that she came in so soon after the report was published to actually look and say, how do we, to maybe take a step back and say, what is the purpose of child benefit? How do we ensure that we get the delivery of outcomes for child benefit that we should be getting and that people want us to get? So do we look more at the affordable, accessible and quality childcare? Do we look at extending the scheme to a second year? Do we look at after-school childcare? Because that's done very much on an ad hoc basis at the moment. It doesn't have the same structure. Do we look at university primary healthcare for all children? School book schemes? There's different ways that we can provide services and support to children. But I do wish to mention, Minister, about data. You mentioned about the developments that we've had in data, and I think that is very welcome, and I do welcome your approach in trying to ensure that we do have an evidence base in how we move forward, and we actually understand. Very often when I hear economists talking about demographics, I'm shouting at the radio, that's birth rate, as you said yourself, Minister. We have an increase in birth rates, but economists don't seem to want to talk. They'll talk about demographics, but that is what we're talking about. It is about children, and I think all too often children are forgotten in these issues. And if we look, for example, Eurofund, which you mentioned yourself in the paper, Minister, the foundation out in Loughlin's Council, the improvement of living and working conditions. I visited them recently, and they're doing some really interesting research looking at children, looking at parenting supports and how those parenting supports can be best delivered for children. And for me, if we look at that transition of a child and get to the young person, those young people who are not in education, employment or training. Ireland has the 4th highest rate number of young people who are in the NEET category in the EU. Now that's not an area we want to be up at 4th highest. You know, we want to be down low on that list. And the difficulty is, if you look at those NEET figures, if you go to school teachers, if you go to youth workers, they can point out those young people much earlier on in the cycle, and it's where we should be intervening in the cycle. So for me, it's trying to look, Eurofund on the job seekers, they did a cost of the economic loss to society, and they calculated for Ireland that we lose in the region of 2% of GDP, which indicates that the cost of youth unemployment is 3.16 billion. And so I think when we're talking in those sort of economic figures, that's the cost of youth unemployment. But it has been proven that if a young person is living in poverty, they're likely to go on to unemployment. That pathway is set. So for me, it's very important to get in earlier and to really help to change that young person's life. And Minister, I do welcome that you've actually asked the youth work sector to investigate. How do we intervene? How do we best ensure that point? And I do welcome that, because I do think we need to look at that tipping point for a young person, where they will go into unemployment versus getting education, training or employment, and to see how we can support those young people. And Minister, I just want to mention next week, I know you're having the EU Youth Conference on social inclusion of young people, and I think that's really significant that Ireland has chosen to host that conference under its Irish presidency, and I was delighted to see that you're doing it in cooperation with the European Commission, the European Youth Forum and the National Youth Council of Ireland. And I don't know if you know, Minister, but actually during the 5th Irish presidency of the European Union, the European Youth Forum was born. It had its inaugural meeting in Cork on the 6th of July 1996, and I know this because I was there. I'm actually a co-founder of the European Youth Forum, and I was one of the previous Secretary Generals of the 3 youth platforms, and we came together to merge into one. And in fact, 2 of the 3 Secretary Generals were Irish at the time, and we came together and we had the inaugural meeting in Cork under the Irish presidency in July 1996. So for me, it's even more delighted to see them coming back to Dublin. Minister, I just want to also touch on the Child and Family Support Agency. I very much welcome the moves that are happening, welcome the development. I look forward to seeing the bill. As you know yourself, Minister, I've made public my opinions on trying to ensure that we have a debate on this issue. But just one point, Minister, I wish to raise with you is the new agency will have a budget of 545 million for 2013, and in the hearings that we had at the Health and Children Committee last week, it was said that approximately 100 million will be going to NGOs and services. And when it was published in the Irish Times, my opinion on the new agency, what surprised me was the number of organisations who contacted me that they're fearful to talk about it publicly because they're fearful of the funding they get, that funding will be cut, and that chilling effect. So I do think we need to create an environment where people can come constructively with proposals to ensure that the agency works. So there is a little chilling effect happening at the moment that I know, Minister, it's not your intention, and it surprised me by the number and the types of organisations who came to me about it. So I just wanted to raise that with you, because I know it's not something that you would have any intention to do, but it's the reality of what's happening. But thank you, Minister. As I said, I think the paper that you've put before us today should be circulated to all TDs and senators. Thank you for it.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Aileen Hayden, the Hall.
Thank you very much, Lasca Hirlock.